Hello, this is Bob from Bakatronics LLC, and today we're going to talk about assembling some of the BK100 series kits. Well, before you get started, one of the things you really should think about, or is a mandatory type thing, is a set of safety glasses in case of any splatter from the solder or any cutoffs from the components don't hit you and take your eye out. The next helpful or mandatory thing would be a nice little soldering iron. We recommend something between 25 and 30 watts. This is just one that we got at Harbor Freight. Very good. A nice set of diagonal cutters so that you can cut off the components after they're assembled. Some sort of a wire stripper so that you can strip off the leads to get them nice and prepared for soldering to the circuit board. Some optional accessories are these little spring clips that I got at one of the local stores, little metal ones. They're good for holding components in place and for soldering LEDs. And I use a little piece of leftover perf board for soldering on in a different way. That's not necessarily you have to have that, but it is helpful. The other thing that I use that's very, very helpful is this sliding clamp that you can open and close fairly easily. And I will take, like when I'm soldering, I will put the circuit board in there and then just slide it in to hold it tight. Using this little piece there, and then I can put the hand end over here into a small vise, and then I can turn it over and solder on the back side, or I can put the components in on the other side. Very, very handy, and you'll see this later in action when I use it to actually solder. You can see the basic components here for the basic kit are, of course, the circuit board and the back side. There's a small little two-prong button. There's a 4-pin chip that's actually a diode bridge that will convert if you're using an AC power supply or a DCC power supply or a regular DC. It will help so that you don't have to worry about polarity. This takes care of it. There's a socket that the chip's going to go in afterwards when we're completed. There's a capacitor that we use that could be anywhere from 10 to 50 microfarads, which is used strictly to smooth out any ripples in the voltage if you're using a power supply. There's a 10K resistor as part of the basic package that goes into the circuit board that holds the chip, helps stabilize the chip. A voltage regulator that will bring the voltage down from anywhere from 6 to 16 volts. It will bring it down to a steady 5 volts, and that's what the chip requires to run. And we put a little solder in the package, and then of course there will be, in the end, there will be a specific chip to the model that you're using. Okay, so let's get started now with the basic assembly of the basic components that go into the circuit board for all of the kits that we sell under the BK100 series. One of the important things to remember on all of the kits is to read the instructions thoroughly, because sometimes I may put things in a slightly different order in this video than you might do, but the way that I'm going to do it is show you first thing that I try to do is put in the 10K resistor bend the leads, and then put it into the spot marked R1. Push it all the way down to the bottom, and then just bend the lead slightly so that it stays in place, so when I turn it over it doesn't fall out. The next thing I put in is the little two-prong button. It sort of snaps in pretty easily. Sometimes I have to snap it a little bit. And then that stays in place pretty good, if you can see that. Alright. And then the next thing we would do, I would do anyways, because I put these in, is to put in the little diode bridge. And it has two little things on it. One side has these little wavy lines on it, and the other side has a plus. So we match up the plus with the plus on the circuit board. And put that in like that, and then I take my thumb and I just bend a little bit of the two of the little leads over so that, again, when I turn it over it doesn't fall out. Now then I will put in the chip socket, and on this one I'm going to hold it in with the little clip that I showed you earlier, because you need to get that in there. Hold that in there tight so it doesn't fall out. So now I have the 10K resistor that I'm going to solder in, the 4-pin diode bridge, the button, and the chip socket. So I'll solder ones on this side first, and then I'll take the clip off and solder the other ones. So while I set up the soldering, we'll just take a break from the video. Okay, well, now we're going to solder in those components we just put on. I get my soldering iron ready here. I grab a little bit of solder, and hopefully you can see this. Oops, sorry, I jiggled that, but first we'll solder in the 4-pin connector here. We try to get a nice, push the soldering tip against both the bottom pre-tinned part of the circuit board and the pin of the other. We get a little bit more solder there. And now we'll solder in the button. The two prongs on the button. And we look at it, make sure it looks like it's a nice smooth thing. Sometimes I have to go over them a little bit just to make sure. The better the soldering, the more success you'll have. And one of the things we want to make sure is we have good connections on this 10K, because the 10K is very critical to the operation of the thing. It holds the chip from recycling. If without that, and if you have problems with the chip resetting all the time, it's probably something to do with the 10K resistors not connected right. And I'll remove this clip so I can solder the other side in. Solder the pins on there. And usually if you get your soldering gun like a little bit of pressure towards the side of the pin with the tip of the soldering gun, it does a much better job. And sometimes I'll just go over everything a second time just to make sure. And then always clean your soldering iron prior to each soldering group. And I'll trim off the excess of these two. And then it should, I don't know if I can see it that well, but it should look pretty good. So, all right, we'll put it aside now and put the other components into it. Okay, now I've added the regulator into there, the little 78L05 regulator that looks like a transistor, but it's not. It's a voltage regulator. And when you put that in, you have to make sure that you have that flat side marking matching the little line, the white line that's on the place with the three little holes to put the regulator in. And then I put the capacitor in place, making sure that the long lead, which is positive, is marked into the hole with the little plus on it, so that we have the positive lined up with the positive hole. And then I bend the leads over a little just to hold it in, and then I'm going to solder it in place. So now I've put the circuit board back in the little fixture that holds the board in a nice position. It makes it more comfortable for me to solder in. And first I'm going to solder in one leg of the voltage regulator and the center leg of the voltage regulator. Anytime you're working with any sensitive components like a voltage regulator or a transistor, you don't want to keep the heat on it for too long. Usually they recommend no more than 5 seconds. Then I'm going to solder one side of the capacitor in and the other side. Then we're going to trim the leads off of the capacitor, and then the three leads off of the voltage regulator, and that should be pretty good. So now the basic assembly is fairly complete, where we have the the diode bridge is in place, the chip sockets in place, the 10K resistors in place, the voltage regulator, the button, and the capacitor. And this pretty much completes the basics to all of the BK100 series kits. And so from here you would go on to the individual one where you would customize it by adding the resistors for the output for different types of LEDs and different kits. So, and again, make sure you always read the instructions, and if there are any accessories that are going to be that you chosen as options, that you'll want to make sure you know when to put those on, because there is maybe a different sequence of when you would do those. So that's it for this part of it, and we'll continue on with the next very soon.